Hey everyone, welcome back to the 5 p.m. podcast. It's January 25th, 2025, and as always, I'm Dan, your resident politics nerd.
And I'm Tina, the one who tries to keep Dan from going too deep into the political weeds. Most of the time.
Hey, those weeds are interesting. But yeah, today we've got a topic that's right in my wheelhouse, but also super relevant to, well, everyone. We're diving into this new Senate Bill SB2025. That's all about foreign aid and terrorism.
Okay, wait, before we get into the bill itself, can we talk about why this matters? Like, who actually cares about foreign aid policy besides, senators?
Right, good point. So picture this. The U.S. government sends money to other countries, right? Sometimes it's for humanitarian stuff, like after a natural disaster. Other times, it's more about, let's call it strategic partnerships. But basically, it's a way for the U.S. to help out and exert some influence around the world.
Okay, I'm with you. Money talks, as they say. But how does terrorism fit into all this?
That's where it gets interesting. This bill, SB 2025, it's saying, hey, if a country is labeled as a state sponsor of terrorism, they get zero, zilch, nada in foreign aid from the U.S.
Seems pretty straightforward. No money for countries that support terrorism. But, how do they decide who's on this list?
Oh man, that's a whole can of worms. It's the Secretary of State who makes that call. And it's based on whether a country has, and I'm quoting here, repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism.
Okay, that sounds a bit subjective maybe, like what counts as support?
Exactly. And that's where a lot of the debate is. But as of now, there are 4 countries on the list: Syria, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba.
Those are some big names. So this bill would cut off all aid to them, no exceptions?
That's the idea. And this is where it gets tricky, because some people say, great, that's how it should be. They argue it sends a strong message,
I can see that. No one wants to be seen as funding terrorism, even indirectly.
But then there's the other side. I was reading this analysis by Dr. Amanda Johnson. She's a big shot international relations professor, and she's saying this bill could actually backfire. Like, it might make it harder to have diplomatic talks with these countries.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like, by cutting off aid, we're also cutting off communication?
Kind of. And another expert, Robert Smith, he used to be an ambassador, no less. He's saying it reduces our flexibility. Like, sometimes you need that carrot and stick approach, right?
Right, so instead of just a stick, maybe we need the option of a carrot. Or at least a smaller stick?
Totally. And here's another thing. This bill is partisan. It was introduced by Senator Rubio, a Republican, and so far, it's mostly Republicans who are backing it.
Ah, politics. So it might face an uphill battle in Congress?
Could be. But it's interesting, It really highlights the different ways people think about foreign policy.
For sure. And I'm thinking about the people in these countries too. Like, if we cut off aid, does that hurt regular citizens more than the governments?
That's a huge concern. There was this report, I think, from Human Rights Watch, saying that aid often goes to things like food programs and medical supplies. So cutting it off could have real humanitarian consequences.
So it's not just about politics and diplomacy, it's about real people's lives.
Exactly. And there's this case study about Sudan. They used to be on the state sponsors of terrorism list, but they were removed in 2020. And after that, they got more international investment and aid.
Oh, so there's evidence that getting off the list can actually help a country?
Yeah, it suggests that these designations have long-term impacts. It is almost like being on a blacklist.
So what's the takeaway here? Is this bill a good idea or not?
Well, like most things in politics, it's complicated. On one hand, it's a strong statement against terrorism, but on the other hand, it could hurt diplomatic efforts and affect innocent people. I found this really interesting quote from a Congressional Research Service paper. They basically said this bill could impact diplomatic leverage and humanitarian efforts.
It seems like there's no easy answer. And I guess that's why they have these debates in Congress, right?
Right. And what's interesting is that there's a trend towards more targeted sanctions these days, rather than these broad, sweeping measures. You see, this is what I find so fascinating about these kinds of bills.
I can tell. You're practically vibrating with excitement over here.
It's just, these decisions have such big ripple effects, It's like that butterfly effect thing. A bill is introduced in Washington, and it could affect someone's life halfway across the world.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get lost in the political back and forth and forget about the human impact. It sounds like something our listeners should maybe write to their representatives about, huh?
Definitely. This stuff matters. And hey, If anyone out there has experiences with foreign aid or has been to any of these countries, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. You can find us on all the socials, and our website has a contact form too. We love hearing your perspectives.
All right, Tina, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. Thanks for helping me unpack this complicated topic.
Anytime, Dan. It's always fun to explore these issues with you, even when they're a bit dense.
Hey, politics is just applied social science, right? It's all about people at the end of the day. And that's what makes it so cool. Important.
Haha, right. Important. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the 5 p.m. podcast. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of politics and policy.
Until then, stay curious and don't forget to vote. Eventually. When there's an election. You know what I mean.
Bye, everyone.